I was sitting in my penthouse apartment in Los Angeles, surrounded by celebrities and their handlers, giving a reading to one of the biggest pop stars in the world. My spirit guides were feeding me information like they always did, and this woman was hanging on my every word. She had paid me $10,000 for this private session, and so far I had told her things about her life that no one else could possibly know. But then something shifted. The room got cold. I mean freezing cold. So cold I could see my breath forming in front of my face in the middle of a California summer. And I saw something standing in the corner behind her that was not human. It had been disguised as my spirit guide for 15 years, but in that moment the mask slipped. And what I saw underneath, what had been speaking to me, giving me accurate predictions, building my entire career, making me rich and famous. It was demonic, pure evil, and it looked at me and smiled because it knew I finally understood what I had been serving this whole time. Let me take you back to how I got into this world in the first place. I grew up in a small town in New Mexico during the 1980s. My mother was what you would call a spiritual seeker. She had grown up Catholic, going to Mass every Sunday, confessing her sins, following all the rules. But she left the church in her early 20s because she felt like it was too restrictive, too narrow, too focused on guilt and rules instead of spiritual experience. She wanted more. She wanted to feel something. So she started exploring everything else. Our house was like a new age bookstore and metaphysical shop combined. We had dream catchers hanging in every window to catch negative energy while we slept. We had crystals on every surface, amethyst clusters on the coffee table, rose quartz on the nightstands, black tourmaline by all the doors for protection. The bookshelves were filled with volumes about spirit communication, cosmic energy, past life regression, channeling, tarot interpretation, and astrology. I grew up thinking this was completely normal. I thought everyone's mother burned sage every morning and talked to invisible beings. I remember being maybe 5 or 6 years old and watching my mother do readings for her friends at our kitchen table. She would light candles and burn incense until the whole room was hazy with fragrant smoke. Then she would lay out those tarot cards in a specific pattern called a Celtic cross, close her eyes, take several deep breaths, and begin speaking in a completely different voice. It was lower and slower than her normal voice, almost like someone else was borrowing her mouth to communicate. Her friends would lean forward, hanging on every word, and often they would start crying. They would thank her for the messages, for the guidance, for connecting them with deceased relatives who had important things to say. I thought my mother was special. I thought she had a beautiful gift that helped people find peace and direction. I wanted to be just like her when I grew up. What I did not understand then was that my mother was also deeply troubled. Behind the spiritual seeker persona, she struggled with depression and anxiety that no amount of meditation or crystal healing could touch. She would go through dark periods where she would barely get out of bed for days or even weeks. She was on a constant search for something that always seemed just out of reach. Happiness? Peace? Wholeness? The spirits gave her information, but they never gave her what she was actually looking for. By the time I was a teenager, I was already practicing myself. My mother encouraged it enthusiastically. She said I had the gift too, that she could see it in me even more strongly than in herself, that the spirits were drawn to me like moths to a flame. I started with astrology because it seemed the most scientific and legitimate of all the practices. There were charts and calculations and planetary positions that followed mathematical rules. It was not just intuition or feelings. It was a system. It felt respectable in a way that other practices did not. I would spend hours in my bedroom calculating birth charts by hand, using ephemeris tables to find where each planet was positioned at the exact moment someone was born. I learned what each planetary placement meant, what it said about personality and potential. I memorized the aspects and houses and transits and progressions. And when I started doing readings for my friends at school, I discovered something remarkable. I was shockingly accurate from the very beginning. I knew things about people that I should not have known. I would look at someone's chart and tell them about their childhood trauma, about the way their parents' divorce had affected them, about the secret fears they had never spoken out loud to anyone. I would tell them about relationship patterns they would fall into, about career paths that would suit them, about challenges they would face in specific years of their lives. And they would stare at me with their mouths open, asking how I could possibly know all that. I told them it was written in the stars. The planets do not lie. What I did not understand at the time was where that information was actually coming from. I thought I was just reading celestial patterns, tapping into some universal energy or cosmic database that existed outside of time and space. I had no idea that I was actually communicating with entities, that I was opening doors that should have stayed firmly closed, that something was feeding me information for purposes I could not begin to imagine, that I was being groomed for something much darker than I could comprehend. In my early 20s, I moved to Los Angeles to pursue this professionally. I had built up a small following through my blog and early social media presence, and people were starting to pay for my readings. I rented a tiny apartment in a not great neighborhood and set up a small altar where I would do sessions over the phone or video chat. At first, my clients were just regular people with regular problems. Housewives wondering if their husbands were cheating. College students anxious about choosing the right major. People going through divorces looking for hope that love would come again. Midlife crisis sufferers searching for meaning and purpose. I genuinely believed I was helping them navigate their lives with celestial wisdom. But then something happened that changed the entire trajectory of my career. I did a reading for an actress. She was not super famous at the time, just a supporting character on an up-and-coming television show, but she was starting to get noticed in the industry. And as I looked at her chart and opened myself to receive information, something different happened. It was like a fire hose of knowledge suddenly pointed at my mind. I told her she would land a major film role within 8 months. I told her it would involve water, that there would be a scandal around the production that would make international headlines, but that it would ultimately launch her into a completely different stratosphere of fame and recognition. She looked at me skeptically across my little table. 8 months is very specific, she said. That is quite a bold prediction. I just nodded calmly. I was only reporting what I was receiving. I was only saying what I was being told to say by my guides. 8 months later, almost to the exact day, she was cast as the lead in a major studio film about a shipwreck at sea. During production, a scandal involving the director erupted that dominated entertainment news for weeks, and her performance in that movie earned her an Academy Award nomination. When she walked the red carpet at the ceremony, she mentioned me in an interview. She posted about me to her millions of social media followers. She told every famous person she knew, and that is when my career absolutely exploded. Within 2 years, I had a waiting list of celebrities desperate for readings. Musicians at the top of the charts whose songs you have definitely heard. A-list actors whose faces you would recognize instantly from blockbuster films. Tech executives worth billions of dollars who wanted to know which investments would pay off. Professional athletes from every major sport trying to gain an edge. Fashion icons and media moguls and politicians and television personalities. The elite of the elite were all seeking my guidance. They would fly me to their mansions and penthouses on private jets. They would meet me in private rooms at restaurants where a single meal cost more than most people's monthly rent. They paid whatever I asked because my predictions were so frighteningly accurate. I charged $500 an hour at first, then 1,000, then 5,000. Then I stopped charging by the hour altogether and just named my price based on who was asking. For some clients, a single session cost more than most people make in several months, and they paid it gladly, without hesitation or negotiation, because I delivered results that seemed impossible. I would tell a musician the exact date their album would go platinum and what song would be the biggest hit. I would tell an actress when she would meet her future husband what his first name would be and where their paths would cross. I would tell executives which deals to pursue and which to walk away from, which partnerships would flourish and which would end in betrayal. And I was right. Over and over and over again. I was right in ways that defied any rational explanation. I bought a penthouse in Hollywood Hills with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that looked like a sea of stars at night. I drove a Mercedes. Then I upgraded to a Porsche. I wore designer clothes that cost more than my mother's car back in New Mexico. I attended exclusive parties with people whose faces you see on magazine covers. I was living the dream that millions of people chase their entire lives and never catch. But here is what I never talked about publicly. Here is what I never told anyone, not even my closest friends. Not even my mother who had started me on this path. There was something deeply, fundamentally wrong happening to me that I could not explain or escape. Every night when I went to sleep, I had nightmares. Not regular nightmares about embarrassing moments or showing up somewhere unprepared. These were nightmares so vivid and so terrifying that I would wake up screaming at the top of my lungs. My sheets soaked with sweat, my heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. I would see dark figures standing at the foot of my bed, just watching me with eyes that reflected no light. Sometimes there was one figure, sometimes there were many, crowded into the corners of my room. I would feel pressure on my chest like something heavy and invisible was sitting on me, crushing my lungs, making it impossible to draw breath no matter how hard I tried. I would hear voices whispering things that I could never quite make out, but that filled me with a dread so deep, I thought I would drown in it. I started sleeping with all the lights on like a frightened child. I started taking sleeping pills just to get through the night, without waking up in terror. Then I started combining sleeping pills with wine, because the pills alone were not strong enough to keep the darkness at bay. Nothing really helped. The nightmares came anyway. The figures watched me anyway. The darkness followed me no matter what I did. And then there was the emptiness. Despite everything I had achieved, despite all the money and fame and access and admiration, I felt hollow inside. Completely, utterly hollow. I would stand in my beautiful penthouse looking out at the glittering Los Angeles skyline that most people would give anything to see, and I would feel absolutely nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, no peace, no gratitude. Just this aching void in my chest that nothing could fill, no matter how much I acquired or accomplished. I tried everything to fill that void. I tried shopping, buying designer bags, and shoes and jewelry I did not need, just for the momentary rush. I tried relationships with attractive, successful men who looked perfect on paper, but left me feeling more alone than ever. I tried travel, visiting the most beautiful and exotic locations on Earth. I went to Bali and participated in ayahuasca ceremonies deep in the jungle, vomiting for hours while visions swirled around me. I went to Peru and worked with shamans in the sacred valley, doing plant medicine rituals under the stars. I went to India and stayed at ashrams, studying with gurus who had thousands of followers. I went deeper and deeper into the spiritual world, convinced that if I could just access more knowledge, more power, more connection to the unseen realm, I would finally feel complete. I would finally find what I was looking for. But the deeper I went, the worse everything got. The nightmares became more intense and more frequent and more real. The dark figures became bolder, appearing even when I was fully awake. And my spirit guides, the voices that had been giving me information for years, they started changing. They started becoming demanding and aggressive. They would wake me up at 3 a.m. with urgent messages that had to be delivered immediately. They would not let me rest until I had written down every word they spoke. Sometimes they would give me information about terrible things that were coming, tragedies and deaths that I could do nothing to prevent. And I would have to carry that weight completely alone. I remember one night that still haunts me when I close my eyes. I was doing a reading for a famous musician, one of the biggest stars in the world at that time. He was at the absolute height of his career, selling out stadiums on every continent. He was young and healthy and vibrant and full of excitement about the future. And as I looked at his chart and listened to my guides, I was shown something horrifying. I saw his death. I saw the exact circumstances. I saw the exact date. I saw the exact cause. And it was less than a year away. I sat there frozen across the table from him, not knowing what to say. How do you tell someone they are going to die? How do you deliver that message? I ended up giving him a vague warning about being careful with his health, about slowing down, about not taking unnecessary risks. He laughed it off and told me I worry too much, that he had never felt better in his life. 10 months later, he was dead. Exactly the way I had seen it, exactly when I had seen it. And something in me broke that night. I had been given this information. I had carried it for almost a year, and I could not do anything to stop it from happening. What was the point of knowing if I was utterly powerless to change anything? What kind of gift was this that only let me watch helplessly as tragedies unfolded? That was the first time I seriously questioned what I was involved in. But I pushed those doubts aside. I had too much to lose. The turning point came during that reading I mentioned at the beginning. I was with one of the biggest pop stars in the world, someone whose face is known on every continent. Her team had flown me to her mansion for a private session. We were sitting in her living room, which was larger than most people's entire houses, surrounded by crystals and candles and spiritual artifacts. I was channeling information like I always did, speaking in that voice that was not quite my own. And then suddenly, everything stopped. The room went ice cold. I could literally see my breath forming clouds in the air, which made no sense in the middle of a California summer. The candles flickered violently, though there was no breeze. And I felt something behind me, heavy and dark and ancient beyond comprehension. I turned around slowly, and that is when I saw it. A figure standing in the corner. It was not a shadow. It had depth and form and substance. And it had eyes. Red eyes staring directly at me with an intelligence that was ancient and utterly malevolent. In that moment of horrifying clarity, I realized this was what had been speaking to me for 15 years. This was my spirit guide without the mask. This was the source of all my accurate predictions, all my supernatural knowledge, all my fame and fortune. And it was smiling at me because it knew I finally understood what I had been serving. The pop star did not see it. She was still waiting for me to continue the reading. But I could not speak. I could not move. I was frozen in absolute terror. I made some excuse and left. I drove for hours through the hills, crying and shaking and trying to make sense of what I had seen. Everything I had built was a lie. I had been communicating with demons, and they had been using me to gain access to the most influential people in the world. That night, I tried to stop. I put away all my crystals and cards and charts. But when you open doors to the demonic realm, they do not close easily. The attacks started immediately. Not just nightmares anymore. I would feel hands closing around my throat when I was completely alone in my apartment. Invisible fingers squeezing. I would hear voices screaming at me constantly, day and night. I would see shadows moving in my peripheral vision everywhere I looked. I stopped being able to sleep at all. I stopped being able to eat. I lost 20 pounds in 3 weeks. My face became gaunt. My eyes became hollow. I looked like death because I genuinely felt like I was dying. I tried everything I knew from my spiritual background. I saged my apartment until the smoke was choking. I called on other spirit guides for protection. I did rituals and ceremonies. Nothing worked. Everything made it worse, because I was using demonic power to fight demonic power. One night I was lying on my bathroom floor because it was the only place I felt even slightly safe. The attacks had been relentless for weeks. I had not truly slept in longer than I could count. I was hallucinating from exhaustion, seeing things that might or might not have been real. And in that moment of complete brokenness, I heard a different voice. Not the voices that had been tormenting me. Something else. Something that felt like light instead of darkness. Like warmth instead of cold. And it said 3 words. Call on Jesus. I had never been religious. I had explored every spirituality except Christianity. But I had nothing left to lose. So I said it out loud. Jesus, if you are real, please help me. Please. What happened next was like an explosion of light filling my entire apartment. Not physical light from a lamp or the sun, but something else entirely. Pure, radiant, living light that seemed to push back the darkness from every corner of the room. The oppressive weight that had been crushing me for weeks lifted instantly. The voices that had been screaming at me went completely silent. The shadows that had been lurking in my peripheral vision scattered like roaches when you turn on a light switch. And I felt something I had never experienced in my entire life. Peace. Real peace. Not the temporary calm I used to get from meditation or yoga. Deep, permanent, bone-level peace that seemed to penetrate every cell of my body. I lay there on that cold bathroom floor and I cried for hours. Not from fear this time. Not from desperation, from relief. From the overwhelming realization that I had been rescued from something I did not even fully understand. I had been drowning in an ocean of darkness for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe. And someone had reached down and pulled me out. But the encounter did not end there. As I lay weeping, I became aware of a presence in the room. Not dark. This was light and warmth and love. And I heard a voice speaking to my heart. It said, I have always loved you. Even when you were running from me. Even when you were serving the enemy. I was waiting for you to call on me. I sobbed harder. How could he love me after everything I had done? After 15 years of leading others astray? And the voice said, that is exactly why I died. So that people like you could come home. Your sins are forgiven. You are clean. In that moment, I understood grace for the first time. Not as a concept, but as a living reality washing over me. Jesus had not come to condemn me. He had come to rescue me. Over the following months, I learned who Jesus actually was, not the caricature I had dismissed for years. The real Jesus who came for broken, lost, deceived people like me. I learned the spiritual realm was not neutral. There was God, and there was the enemy, light and darkness. And I had spent 15 years unknowingly serving the wrong side. I learned that the accurate predictions and supernatural knowledge were bait. The demons gave information to build trust and dependence. All the while, they were gaining access to people's lives through me. I had been a gateway for darkness while thinking I was a channel for light. The guilt I felt was overwhelming at first. But the pastor I was meeting with kept reminding me that the blood of Jesus was powerful enough to cover every sin I had ever committed. The process of getting completely free took time. I had to destroy everything from my old life. Every crystal, every tarot deck, every astrology book. I piled it all up and burned it. I had to reach out to former clients and tell them I was no longer practicing, and explain why. Some thought I had lost my mind, but a few of them have since given their lives to Jesus too. I also had to deal with losing my income overnight. I had to sell the penthouse. I had to sell the cars. I had to start over from nothing, but I did not care. I had something no amount of money could buy. I had freedom, real freedom. For the first time in my life, I was not empty anymore. It has been 6 years since that night on the bathroom floor. I spend my time warning people about the dangers of the occult. I speak at churches and conferences. I reach out to people still trapped in the New Age community because I know how lost they are. They genuinely want spiritual truth. They just do not realize they are looking in the wrong places. And I want to speak directly to anyone watching who is involved in astrology, tarot, channeling, mediumship, any of it. I know it feels real. I know the information is accurate. But I am telling you, from 15 years at the highest levels of this industry, you are being deceived. The spirits you communicate with are not guides or angels or ascended masters. They are demons in disguise. And their goal is not to help you. Their goal is to own you. The accuracy is the bait. The experiences are the hook. Once you are deep enough, they reveal what they really are. But by then, most people are too far in to escape on their own. Here is the good news. There is someone who can get you out. His name is Jesus. His power is greater than anything in the spiritual realm. I saw 15 years of bondage shattered in a single moment when I called on his name. Not because I deserved it, but because he is who he says he is. If you are in that world right now, feeling the emptiness I felt, experiencing the darkness I experienced, there is something more. His name is Jesus, and he is waiting for you to call on him, just like he was waiting for me.